It's so insane that women's bodies are so policed that you can't, there's nothing wrong with being fat. Like, as a woman, you just can't be fat in peace. And it happened at school all the time. You know, we'd get onto a topic and suddenly race would be brought up and you just see heads swivel and everyone's staring at me.
I've been in an abusive relationship where I was kind of like abused by my partner. Men go through this as well.
Like, I spent all of this money and I was like, oh, I'm my own boss. This is fun. Horrible. I normally meet a lot of people via Instagram, but I still meet a lot of people on LinkedIn. I think it's probably one of the most underutilized platforms for most content creators because you have LinkedIn influencers.
Oh yeah, I completely agree.
But I don't like LinkedIn. I used to like it, but I think there's this weird blurred line between LinkedIn and other forms of social media. So LinkedIn's almost like Facebook now.
Yeah.
Oh, the amount of times I log in, you know, there's fake inspirational stories.
Oh yeah.
That are just.
But you know, LinkedIn's starting to crack down on that. I think not them themselves, but they're pushing a lot more the filter your own content type of. So
okay.
You have easy access to, I don't like this content, I don't want to see it on my timeline anymore. So that's changing a bit. But I think it has benefits and downsides. One, the downside is your timeline can all of a sudden look like a Facebook timeline.
Yeah.
And
full of boomers.
Yeah, but the benefit is that there are people out there that are creating more relatable content than, you know, being extremely formal and just talking business and so on. Which I personally feel like it can relate better with your audience if you share yourself a bit more on and to me it doesn't really matter if it's LinkedIn or other places, but in the same time, you know, it's quite controversial because there's a lot of people that say no, LinkedIn should be just for formal professional stuff and nothing else.
I think as long as there's a nice balance, but you also have to remember all the different industries. So I've got so many different industries on my LinkedIn and the professional content looks very different across all of them because obviously I've got content creators on there, people that are in PR and marketing, which obviously is going to look a lot different from tech. But I think for me is this is probably going to make me sound a little bit like a Grinch, but it's the family orientated content,
right?
That I find quite weird. Like you're posting your children or like your dogs, and there's no relevancy to a career.
Funny you say that because I just posted my Jack Russells on LinkedIn.
What was the caption?
Well, I mentioned that weekends are for basically relaxing from, basically detaching from the status quo. And the way I detach from the status quo is with my stress melters, which are my Jack Russells. That was kind of like the message. But
I do get that. And I think there still is something useful in there. Because I see, obviously there's the well-being at work kind of industry that I guess I'm a little bit involved in, which makes sense. So kind of switching off and learning how to make the most of your life and get a work-life balance kind of could fit in there potentially.
For me, the reason why it fits is as long as you don't overdo it and all of a sudden it becomes your family Facebook profile.
That's where I get the ick.
But do you know that I got the most engagement to that post?
I mean, the dogs.
Whatever else, right? So people have...
Any dog post is usually
exactly. But I think it does have a space as long as it's done with care and limiting the amount of posts that you post there. Because again, people that go to LinkedIn go for professional connections and networking and things like that. And if all you do is post about your personal life, then you're of no good to anyone that's on that platform, right? Because you know, what can I relate to from a business perspective? How can I link up with you in that sense? But I think showing that just a bit here, a bit there, it just useful. Humanizes you a bit rather than being just, you know, suit and tie person in front of
just not too much. I mean, Twitter is a lawless place.
Oh, yeah.
But I think
very much.
Twitter does have a nice balance.
Right. It does. You're right.
Because I use Twitter for absolutely everything. That's my only space that is mine. So I used to have LinkedIn for my professional kind of side of things. And then I used to have my Instagram just for my silly little posts. And now I'm a content creator on Instagram. So that's work for me. Whereas Twitter, that's the only thing that isn't work. So I just get to be silly on there.
Yeah.
Which is nice. But then I still use it for, I suppose, advice, relatability. And there are a lot of good pages on there that help me quite a lot in my personal and professional life. So information about like autism and ADHD and those kinds of things, which you don't really get anywhere else. And that's what I quite like about Twitter. Whereas what I like about LinkedIn is that I can go there and do my networking and kind of like my job.
Yeah.
And then Instagram, I just go for fashion advice.
I think it's good to have some sort of boundaries, because it's like with working from home over the pandemic, right? It's like,
I think that's where the line started to get like really blurred. But then there's a lot of people that use LinkedIn and only LinkedIn. And I think for them, they probably get all of those things that I get across 3 or 4 different apps on one app alone, which is why I think it's nice to have a balance on there.
Yeah.
But when I tend to remove, what are they called on LinkedIn? Friends? Connections. I tend to remove the connections that are very much using it as Facebook, or if it's like their personal diary, because that's like a little too much for me.
Yeah. We started this podcast and this conversation already, I feel. So let's do the introduction bit, which usually is like you just talking a bit about who you are, an elevator pitch of your business or your career, right? Whatever you want to go. And then we can chat a bit more.
Yeah.
I'll dig into your founder persona a bit more. And the thing is that we haven't seen each other in such a long time, like
3 years.
3 years.
But that's the thing about social media, is because I see you online, it wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think that is a good and a bad thing, because it makes me more distant in people's lives, whereas it feels like I'm not. Because I think I probably have more questions, and I'd probably be like, wow, how is everything? But I know how everything is because I keep up to date with your social presence.
Yeah.
Which, when you say it like that, feels a bit creepy.
And you come in here and it's like, no reaction. It's not impressive enough, okay? But the reality is like, I've seen this 1 billion times. You bombarded my timeline.
Yeah, because I've seen like a lot of your videos. Interestingly, they always come up, but I think it's because I like all of them. So obviously the algorithm's like, this is what he's done.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people that tell me, even new connections, bam, bam, bombard. As soon as they connect with me, they get bombarded on their
But that's
timeline,
good though.
which is interesting.
Like that means your content performs well.
Yeah, true. Right. Who is Chanel?
Oh. Right. So as you're aware from all the lovely conversations we have, I'm a business psychologist and a content creator. I've just finished my second master's, which that was really difficult. It's interesting. My first master's was in occupational and business psychology. That was a breeze. But this was in understanding domestic violence and sexual abuse, which was really insightful and a really captivating and interesting MA. But it was really difficult. Like, it was really depressing. I had to take like long gaps and like sometimes like leave a lecture to go to just decompress before like I'd start again. So in that, I think I wanted to understand more about some of the problems I was having as a business psychologist. I look a lot at diversity, equity and inclusion. And unfortunately, a lot of it still is gender-based discrimination and inequality. Obviously with racism, I know a lot about that firsthand, and it's kind of a lot easier to navigate. The research has been there for years.
Yeah.
But with sexual harassment, especially in the workplace, it's so pervasive, and there's not as much on it. So I've done the second master's in that, which helps me inform my practice as a business psychologist. And as a content creator, it's very separate. I kind of influence on body positivity, fashion and lifestyle, and kind of more authentic experiences. I think what's been quite useful for me is I'm not the usual kind of popular thin model type, which is kind of funny because I'm not that big. I anywhere from like a 12 to a 16. But that's not conventional in modeling, although we've got a lot of curve and plus size models now.
Is it not nowadays? No. Is it still not considered conventional?
It is, but the way I see it is if you're not included as an addition. So for me, I do curve or plus size modeling. I think when I'm regarded as just a model, I think then we'll see like more of a change. But there is a lot more increasing. I like being able to go online and see girls that look like me, because it's really hard sometimes, because I do have like conventional proportions, I guess, in some ways. But it's hard to go onto a website and look at models and see it they're completely different. Like, what does this outfit or what does this dress look like on someone that has a bigger belly than most? Which can be really difficult when shopping. So I kind of do plus size content, curve content, fashion, those kinds of things. But the older I get, the more I'm trying to bridge the gap. So I want my kind of content creation to also include some of the things that I do as a business psychologist. So
interesting.
Looking at those things together. But that's now I have an organization called Novosphere Group. And I kind of create content under that. I manage girls under that, so social media management. And we offer consultancies to clients where we'll help them be diverse and have a diverse offering. Funny enough, I was talking to a really nice train conductor on the way here about it, because I'm really chatty. I can't even remember how we got onto the topic, but a lot of clients sometimes aren't as inclusive as perhaps they think they are. So I went to an event recently because it's Fashion Week, and I was styled and dressed by a client, and I'm not like a crazy plus size figure. I'm a 12 to a 14, but they didn't have any clothes in my size.
As in just your size, or your size and
bigger?
My
size plus, really. Right. I think they had extra smalls.
How did they brought you there if they didn't have...
well, so this is it.
What the hell?
And again, I have to caveat that I'm not a big size, because it gets worse like the bigger you get. My weight fluctuates a lot as a woman, so sometimes I'm a 16 and then it's really hard for me to get anything. But at the moment I'm a 12 to 14, and it's insane to me that you just don't stock my sizes. But also I was invited for almost a kind of VIP experience where they knew ahead of time that I was coming, and still there wasn't really a lot to fit me, which is really demoralizing. Trying on all these different outfits that don't zip up, that don't button up, that I can't get to fit. So it's really good that I'm in the position, I guess, as a customer, as a client, and then as an expert to say, actually, I think you're kind of failing in this area. It's just a lot of people don't make that consideration. And so it's helping those clients to have a diverse offering. So some, for example, might have disabled models on the runway, or black models on the runway for certain brands, but they don't stock their foundation color, or they don't have any accessible products or even an accessible website to shop. And that's when I will talk to those clients and say, it's really great that you want to be inclusive, but if you're only inclusive for a modeling campaign or a social media campaign, then I don't think you're quite doing enough to meet the needs of the people that you're potentially trying to target. And that's okay if they're not, because not everybody caters to a diverse consumer base. But if that's what you're trying to do, you're not quite there yet, but there are some easy ways we can kind of work towards it. So I kind of work in that spectrum, but I'm trying to now influence more in that space because it's around my key interests. It just so happens that obviously I'm a woman and I'm a person, so we all wear clothes. So I influence in that area as well.
Who handles these kind of details? Because you mentioned lack of consideration, which completely agree. I see that constantly when it comes to gender inequality in my industry as well. It's like it's just lack of awareness and such. Before you go into some of these organizations and say, you know what, that's not considerate, this thing, you're missing this, you're missing that, and so on. Who handles those? Because I suppose you get into some of these companies that are already trying to be inclusive. So what kind of roles do you usually handle that before you come in as a consultant and say this? Do they have like equality and inclusivity type of roles?
Sometimes,
in the
like a lot of
companies?
organizations do, but I think the problem is that they don't give the people in those roles enough autonomy, or maybe not enough respect necessarily to understand their job and to give them the tools to make some real change. And I see a lot of organizations actually have diversity and inclusion or equity as side of desk roles. And I think that's really alarming for me. And it says quite a lot about what they think of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Because for me, if it's not enough to be a standalone role, it's probably not taken as seriously enough. And I think the expectation to give people the opportunity to do a very real job as a side of desk activity, that's alarm bells for me, because usually it's picked up by people that are marginalized. So on top of, let's just say like women, for example, who are already doing their job, they now have to take a side of desk activity to try and create a sense of diversity and inclusion for other women in the workplace. Like that's already sending a really bad message.
The standard, oh, you're a woman, you should do this inclusivity bit.
Yeah, and it happens to me a lot throughout my career. It's happened to me a lot. And it happened at school all the time. You know, we'd get onto a topic and suddenly race would be brought up. And I grew up in a very white middle class area, and you just see heads swivel and everyone staring at me for my opinion. And I was very used to that. So I used to do it in the workplace. And I was like, wait, hold on. It's not for me to work overtime to make sure that I'm included in this space. So now when I consult, it's actually usually one of the first questions I ask. How do you tackle this as an organization? And a lot of the time they tackle it as a side of desk activity, which I think is very strange and very undermining, because you wouldn't have someone running IT or HR as a side of desk role. That just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I think in those organizations, there is always a lot of room for improvement, but in like a really quick way, because you can just get management to understand that it is actually a really big task that deserves its own role. And usually people are quite perceptive to that. But when that is the case, you can usually see how these things are missed, and it's just flagging someone in the people and culture or the HR team, and it's just saying, I think there is a need for this because there's a lot that's being missed. And I'm very aware that I have the privilege of a content creator, usually getting invited to events or invited into brands that I'm going to get the best experience there is to offer. And if that experience...
Clearly not. You didn't have clothes to dress as a model.
This is it, right? So if that's lacking for me, you know it's going to be lacking for the staff. It's going to be lacking for the consumers. And that's okay. Well, for the consumer part, it's okay. If that's not who you cater to. But if you want to cater to that audience, you have to understand that you're not doing a good job, and a lot more needs to be done. Because the same way where some companies will cater specifically to minoritized or marginalized communities, there are some that are going to, I suppose, target just the majority, and that's okay. But just be very aware of who you're offering to, because if you start sending this message that you're inclusive and you're not, like that's when you're going to find a problem. Because again, if they didn't invite me, I never would have got my feelings hurt, but you've invited me there, and now you're telling me there's nothing in my size. Which, I mean, as a woman, I think we get a lot marketed towards us of how we should look and how we should be. And when you're inviting me to a fashion event and there's no fashion for me, like, that's very sad. And that did knock my confidence a lot. So it was having that conversation, being like, look, this actually made me feel really awful. It's probably not the message you want to send. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? I can definitely help you figure out, at least, if not for me, just, you know, for everyone else. Because it's not a nice feeling. And a lot of people don't have, I guess, the same power or the same, like, ability to have those raw conversations with the client. Because a lot of the time they have to listen to me. Like, you're paying me to do this. You hired me.
Yeah.
And I'm in the position to be able to have these conversations with the right people, which obviously you probably wouldn't get if you're just walking into the store in the fitting room and they don't have your size. Or some brands are notorious for this. They'll say it's a size 16, but actually it fits like a size 12. Which, that's the worst, because that can be really confusing. Because I know I'm not a size 16, but the size 16 isn't fitting. And that can be really... But that can be really confusing.
Is that the non-standard sizing in clothing that all of these companies have? Because I've experienced that quite a lot as well, where, you know, a brand has a sizing and it's a completely different sizing to a different brand. Or is it just that they're trying to push a certain size to a certain type of audience?
I actually, honestly, to this day, like, I don't know the answer to that question. It doesn't make any sense to me. When you've got your small to large, that makes sense for it to differ, because small to large is quite vague. But when you've got standardized sizing, like your 8, 10, 12, and that's not consistent, I find that's the bit that's quite difficult.
Because that's based on size, like centimeter or stuff size, right? So it's not large,
in theory.
which can be subject to interpretation. Oh, it's a large, isn't it? It's actually a centimeter or meter. Okay.
So that is quite difficult, and I'm not sure if it's because, so there is this argument that those brands don't want to cater to a larger audience. So they look like they do on paper, but then in reality, they might only be catering to a size 12 that they've labeled as a 16.
Interesting.
And there is, like, I suppose for women, it can be really difficult because there is a lot of emphasis on your size. And there is a fear around sizing up, a really big fear around sizing up. I remember when I was younger and I worked at Topshop and everybody had an eating disorder, which is really strange because it was very normalized. You'd ask the girls what they were eating for lunch and it was nothing. Or we would eat lunch and then everyone would make themselves sick after. And it was so normalized, like, nobody questioned it. Management didn't question it. And we were young. We were like 16 working there, and that was the norm. But I remember I got really sick. And I dropped a couple jean sizes and everyone was congratulating me. And I was really sick. Like, I was really ill. And I came into work and everyone was like, oh my God, you're so skinny. And I just got really excited. I was like, wow, look at this reception.
Yeah.
And that's when I was really mindful of my weight, and I didn't used to eat. And I used to be obsessed with dropping a dress size. And then I resumed health and I'd eat more. And I was just so scared to go up a dress size. And I would just refuse. And I would, for years, cram myself into smaller, ill-fitting clothes. Until, I guess, I don't know what really changed. But I stopped focusing on those things. And then I was just more comfortable with wearing what felt comfortable and buying clothes that worked for me instead of trying to work myself into clothes. So there is, like, a really big fear sometimes of sizing up. And that's why some people won't get it, but I think some people will. There's a lot of anxiety about not fitting your normal size. So for people that struggle with that, and you're going into a certain store where you're normally a size 12, but now you're a 16, that can be a really triggering and anxiety-filled event that makes a lot of women insecure or anxious about just dressing.
Yeah.
And it really shouldn't be that way. And again, like a lot of it is, for a long time, there wasn't a model that was above like a size 10 or a 12. And even in modeling, a size 10 is plus size. That's not a standard model size. There was that really famous woman who I can't remember. It might have been Rosie Huntington. Or as like one particular model, she was a size 10 and she was called like a curve model. I was looking over articles from the early 2000s, and there was one of them that was slating Mariah Carey for having fat thighs when she was the equivalent of a size 8. I don't know if this size means anything to you.
So size is very difficult to me to picture, because I've never been in the fashion world or to know size, and I go to a shop and I'm like, give me L. Oh, it's a bit baggy, give me M. But I wanted to ask this because it feels to me a bit odd, and I want to dive into your business and how you got there. But before that, I kind of have a curiosity around this plus size concept. Is there a minus size or regular size? I mean, regular size, I've heard of regular size, but regular size as in the medium, large, regular. But plus size, where did that came from? Because I feel that it's everyone says when they classify being above a certain weight, they call it plus size. Why? Why is that?
I don't know. And that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. And that's what I was saying earlier. It's when people refer to me as a model.
Why are you not a model, basically, and you're a plus size model?
That's just my category. So when I've submitted to clients, it's as a plus size or a curve model. And a part of that is the proportions. Part of that is your look. And a part of that is your size. So, for example, woe betide me, I'm never going to have a flat stomach. It is what it is. Doesn't bother me personally. I don't mind. It's just how my shape is. So even when like I've lost a lot of weight and I'm a size 8, because I still have a relatively big stomach compared to the rest of me, I'd still be classified as plus size because I don't have a flat stomach. I'm not like fat free. So I would be classified as that body type. Sometimes it doesn't matter as much about your size, but a plus size for some clients is 14 plus, and a curve is how you look, if that makes sense.
So it's body type.
So yeah, sometimes it's body type and sometimes it's body size.
What are the body types for a model?
So petite, standard, curve, and plus. So curve is bigger than your standard, and you usually have a small waist, big bum and hips, maybe big breasts as well, because your typical standard model will be quite thin in all aspects, in all areas. And then a petite is relatively short.
Why do they call it, I'm trying to drill here, why do they call it standard model?
It's not even called a standard model, but that's the model.
Right.
So you have a petite model, you have a model. Sometimes you have a tall model, which is just above, obviously tall, and then you have a plus size and a curve. So
it's the classification of the body type, in a sense.
Outside of the norm.
Right. Which I personally think it shouldn't be called the norm. It should have a segment, a class, a name in this. I understand the classification, right? Because you might
that makes sense for casting and fine.
Casting for
it's the additionals.
Sizing for the whatever the clothing that you bring on set for whatever you want. Oh, I need to do a campaign for this specific body type this time round, so I need petite or I need plus size and so on. The one thing that throws me off is that I'm not in this world. I'm not in the model world, but every single time I hear is the term model and plus size model. And it just feels like you're making a very big distinction of what is a model and what is someone that's a model that's plus size. That's why I wanted to clarify, because
couldn't tell you.
in the modeling industry, seems like there's like type of bodies, and it makes sense because you're classifying based on what the whatever the initiative, the campaign is about. But from the outside, it just seems like model and plus size model, which just seems like a bit of a rough classification, like you're ring fencing what a model is, and everyone else is a plus size or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that is also part of the problem. And I also think I don't think classifications on weight and size are useful, especially again when you can see a plus size model that starts at maybe a size 10. I do think that sends a really bad message, because there's almost this negative connotation with being plus size, whereas the average size in the UK is a 16.
Yeah.
But then like a plus size can start from a 12. And that's okay in and of itself, but I think sometimes the messaging around sizing can be quite negative, and it really has been drummed into us for a long time.
Yeah.
And again, even with like the BMI and things like that are really unhelpful. And I think it's really hard for women, especially me. I get a lot of online abuse for everything. I mean, when I post pictures of me at the beach in a bikini, oftentimes the comments will say that I'm like promoting obesity, which, I mean, I'm not obese. Like, it clearly isn't true. But that can be really harmful. You just see a woman that doesn't have a flat stomach or like thin arms or whatever it is, and just assume that they're obese and that they must be unhealthy, or like the connotations and the stigma surrounding fatness or just fat in general is really inherently negative. And so I get that quite a lot as an influencer, which is quite damaging for young women that follow me and see all my body type. Yeah. And that's quite hard, because I've got women that are bigger than me or smaller than me or whatever it is following me, and they say that they get quite scared seeing the backlash that I get. And they're like, well, I'm a lot bigger than you. Like, God knows what would happen to me if I were to wear a bikini. And it's so insane that women's bodies are so policed that you can't, there's nothing wrong with being fat. Like, as a woman, you just can't be fat in peace. And I think that's quite strange, because it doesn't happen for men. Like whenever I go and support Arsenal, who hopefully win this season, and there are a lot of men there that are clearly overweight or have beer bellies, but no, they don't get the same amount of abuse that I get for having a belly, which is quite interesting. And again, it just goes towards like policing women and like unfair beauty standards that apply to women and the expectations of what we have to be attractive. And I think that's quite difficult, and especially for young women growing up, where unfortunately a lot of our social presence dictates who we are or how we're respected, especially like the younger you are. But you just think, like, oftentimes when you meet people, they ask like, oh, so what do you do? What's your job? Kind of to assess who you are, like how much respect they should give you. Younger generations are like, oh, what's your Instagram? Like, what's your social media? And they kind of, it's really strange. People ask me sometimes when I'm at events, like, oh, what are your socials so we can keep in touch? And I've got 2 Instagram accounts. I've got one that's got 40,000 followers and one that's got 400. And I'll always give the 40,000. And then oftentimes people will see it and they'll click the link to my other page.
Let's clarify. One that has 40,000 and one that has 400,000, not 400.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're giving the one that's smaller.
Yeah, the one that's smaller, just because people's reactions are really weird. They're like, wow, I didn't know you were famous, or oh my God. And they, almost get this weird level of starstruck, and it's just like I get it. It's a lot of followers, but that doesn't change literally anything about me as a person. But I see people's estimation of me improve, which is really interesting, but also really disheartening, because I don't get that response when I tell them that I've got 2 masters, or I'm doing this work, or I run this charity, or I run this business. It's the almost level of respect that comes with being well known.
Yeah.
And because I'm well known for being a content creator around fashion, which it's not my main passion, so it doesn't feel great. Whereas if I were to be well known for my business or my work in business psychology or sexual harassment or any of those things, I think I'd get quite giddy and quite excited. Whereas it's purely the kind of respect that comes with being well known for any reason, which I find quite odd. I can't remember how I got onto that, but yeah.
I mean, it's very, very valid, and I think especially when you talk about inclusivity, when you talk about charity, when you talk about any of these topics, and you introduce yourself,
no one
starting
cares.
with that, people seem to kind of like undermine the importance of that by the way they react and they think.
And I don't talk about it that much, actually, which is really interesting, because when you said describe yourself, I don't include those things. And the thing that brings me the most fulfillment is the kind of charity work, or the charitable work that I do, because it makes me feel like I have a sense of purpose, and I'm giving back in a way. I think the world can be really negative in a lot of different ways. And I think if you've got the opportunity to make it more positive in any way, or to kind of do something that brings, I guess, like change, especially in a way that matters to you, I think like that can bring a lot of fulfillment, and that's what makes me happy. But whenever I talk about it, no one cares. Like, a lot of people don't have that level of interest, and so I tend kind of not to bring that up, which is quite sad. I didn't realize I did that.
But I do think that you can utilize your influencer persona towards getting people interested in this other topic, because you are right. If you go and say, well, I'm a social media influencer, I have 500,000 followers, I do modeling, and I also do these other topics, and you start talking about charity, you start talking about sexual abuse at work and this and that, I feel like people would open up a bit more, just because they're talking to someone that they think has value.
Yeah, well, that's
just because of that number.
The hook for me is that I'm a content creator and I've got a following, and then people are more inclined to listen after. Whereas if I had my own way, I would just waffle indefinitely about the things I'm passionate about, which doesn't really include content creation. But I think if you do things the right way, the content creation is a platform to talk about the things that bring you a big sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
But also you need to kind of make it fun and interesting, which brings me on to where I was telling you about a podcast that I'm working on, which will hopefully launch in the new year.
You told me that you're getting that, but you didn't tell me more. So
I'm really excited about it, and it's weird because it is about domestic violence and sexual harassment and those things, but I'm trying to do it in an engaging way, because I mean those things are inherently negative, of course, but I think there can be fun and it's weird saying fun and interesting in the same sentence, but fun and interesting ways to talk about it. So maybe not talking directly about domestic violence, but it's what constitutes maybe a healthy and happy relationship, and how to be a good ally. I think, have you seen the Nonsense with Russell Brand? Have you seen that?
Oh, I did. I think I've seen something. He posted a video recently, just kind of
Yeah.
like addressing that.
So it's things like that, where it's like how to be a good ally. And there's a really good comedian. I want to say his name is Daniel. Not entirely sure, but he was talking about how to be an ally, and it was doing it in a way that was really engaging. It was in the middle of like a comedy set. And I think that's what we need, because unfortunately your content needs to be interesting and engaging.
Yeah.
And I think even me, like I said, I'll leave my lectures sometimes because it's too much. So instead of focusing on this is really bad, men are really bad when they do this, it's okay, well, men are really bad when they do this, but this is how you can be an ally, and then telling an engaging story. And so I'm really lucky where I've got like a strong network of influential and genuinely really great and interesting people. And I'm hoping to bring them on the podcast to talk about how they can be allies and what that looks like, but also having a positive spin. So what does a healthy, happy relationship look like? And I think what's engaging and interesting a lot of the time is dysfunction. You know, you look at things like Love Island or Big Brother, which I'm really excited for. That's coming back soon. And what we love about those shows is they're chaotic and they're dysfunctional. What we rarely see is relationships that are really healthy and what that looks like. I couldn't actually tell you what a healthy relationship looks like on TV. I can't think of any examples.
Why would they put it on TV? It's not, it's not engaging. It's not entertaining.
So
they wouldn't be
right?
making big bucks on it.
So that's what I mean. So it's talking about that. Like, what are some relationship green flags? Like, what does that look like? How can we cultivate healthy relationships in friendships also? And that's also what I do for work. So how do we cultivate healthy relationships? What are some green flags that look like at work? Like, what does a healthy relationship with your boss look like? How do you speak to your colleagues in a positive and healthy way? But also, how do you give criticism that's helpful and not mean and negative? Because nobody likes mean and negative feedback. So it's like, how do we communicate with each other in a healthy way, but also when the messaging's bad? Like, I'm sure you've maybe experienced it when you're annoyed and someone's doing something that's really annoying and you just want to tell them to shut up. And it's like, okay, how do I voice my frustration in a respectful way? It's not easy. Like, I don't always get it right. My partner annoys me sometimes and I can be a bit mean, but sometimes when I mean, it's still in a constructive way. I'm really good at, I would like to think he would agree, I'm good at like emotional regulation. And it's how I communicate that in the moment when I'm upset or I'm annoyed or he's done something that's really annoying and probably me 5 years ago would have sworn and shouted. But now it's like, let me take a step back. You know, that hurt my feelings. It hurt my feelings because this, and this. It might not necessarily be your fault, but it's a combination of my triggers meeting your behavior. And we now need to work through this because I feel sad as a result. And that's something I learned how to do because of therapy. I
thought you were gonna say because of being in HR and seeing all of these bad examples at work.
Well, no, that too. Like, I'm really lucky where I've learned firsthand what's really bad. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to be like that. But it's seeing bad behavior and thinking, oh, I do that. I need to not do that. How do I work on that? And so it's a part of that podcast is trying to take my positive experiences and how I resolve conflict with my partner and what that looks like and what that can look like, because I don't think there are enough examples of that. And I think by teaching people what good examples are, we can identify some bad ones, because I think a lot of us have been in relationships where we weren't great or things that went down like weren't, but those are the things that are often shown on social media, that are shown on TV. And so we grow up almost with this normalized sense of what things should be, when actually, like, it's not healthy.
Yeah, like, well, I see all of these reality TV shows. They're all chaotic. That's standard.
Yeah,
that's
they're
normal,
really
right?
bad. But even this, like, I don't know, some people do, but this normalization of having multiple partners like whilst dating and then like not being truthful with all of them. I think we see that a lot in Love Island because you're in one house. You can't hide it. And whereas they might do that elsewhere. And when I think it's all brought to a head and it's there together and you can't get away with lying, even though they do, but you might find out in the cinema. Do you watch Love Island?
No, I watched some other trashier Netflix series.
Too Hot to Handle?
I think I watched a bit Too Hot to Handle, but I watched Love is Blind.
Yeah.
I watched all of the Love is Blind.
Yeah.
I watched...
But really good. Like,
yeah, it's really
captivating
captivating,
TV.
but it just feels like it's putting on a pedestal these dysfunctional...
And those are the people that become famous as a result of it, right?
Yeah.
So we have this younger generation that's like, oh, look at that toxic relationship, or that makes sense. I'm seeing that everywhere. I can do that. Those are people that I idolize or look up to and they do the same thing. And so it's being able to kind of like normalize these things that are positive and are healthy so you can spot the things that aren't. I think if we had more publicized healthy relationships, platonic also, it'd be easy to say, oh, okay, that's not healthy. But I don't think we have that. So it's starting the podcast to show like what these things are and maybe to kind of identify some things that we should be avoiding, because a lot of the time bad behaviors start small and end up growing. And I think the boiling frog analogy is really useful for finding yourself in situations that you probably wouldn't have tolerated if you saw this behavior up front, but where it can be incremental, it's quite hard to spot. And a lot of the times you can be in a relationship where you love someone and you're more likely to stay with them and be forgiving.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah, same. Whereas now...
Not today, not with Nikki. I'm happy. I'm in a happy relationship, marriage. I'm not...
You married?
No, not yet.
But you will be.
We're engaged, yeah.
Oh, that's cute. I didn't see a ring, and I was... Okay, so I have ADHD, but I'm going for an autism assessment, which hasn't been done yet. So
Are you diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, but not by my GP, privately. I'm through my university, so I've got to get that to marry so I can kind of get the support that I need. But part of that is sometimes saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. So I tend to look like I was looking for a ring. I can't remember if I saw one, but I was going to be like, so when are you going to propose? But I do that a lot, and sometimes it's awkward. So I'm like, don't say it, don't say it, don't say it.
You know, but I think I'm very sus, and Nikki's suspect as well, that I have ADD, not ADHD, but ADD, because I'm not super hyper, but I just get super distracted really quickly.
Yeah, well, do you know what? It's interesting.
To give me details of
I will
where
send
you
you
to get.
I'll send you a link, because I did like an online quick test to see maybe if I have it, and it was like, yeah, you should probably get tested. Right. So I did, but that was really useful for me. How does this even link in with my career? But it was really useful for me, actually, because I found my shortfalls and they made sense. And it was really hard because I was like, why do I suck? I've got such great ideas and I struggle to implement them. And why do I get distracted so easily? And what happens to this enthusiasm that just burns out? And when I found out that I had ADHD, a lot of these things made so much sense to me. And it helped me kind of manage how I work best as a person. And now I have a virtual assistant because I just know the boring admin tasks, they're not going to get done. And it's being realistic with myself and knowing what my weaknesses are. And I think when I was able to accept that I do have ADHD and what that looks like, it's been a lot easier for me to know my strengths and weaknesses and not beat myself up for them, because it was really hard for a while. Because it was... And the thing with ADHD is there's issues with executive function. And it's not limited to the things that you don't enjoy. And so it's things that I know I want to do, like I really want to do, and I feel really passionate about. And sometimes I just can't do them. And when it's mental or psychological and it's not physical, it can be really hard to understand. For myself, I'm like, why can't I just get up and go and do these things? I want to. I really want to, and I can't
relate
do them.
to that so much. I'm like, oh.
No, you should definitely
I should definitely
check.
get this.
And it's those things that were really hard for me because I was like, I'm just lazy. Like, I'm just a useful person. I'm never going to be okay. I'm never going to have the follow through to run a business. And when I found out that a big part of that was ADHD, just a lot of the stigma that I had around myself for being lazy, or the negative views I had of myself, just went away. And I was like, oh, okay. So how am I going to manage this? How am I going to make the appropriate changes? What am I going to put in place? Because ADHD is listed as a disability, and a disability for a reason, because it can be really difficult. But also there's, it makes us quite sensitive to rejection. And that put a lot into perspective for me, because when I've been at organizations and there's red tape, like the level that I'm disheartened just doesn't make any sense. It's, oh, I think we should do this. No. And then I'll like go away and cry. Like I would just go and sit in a room in an office and cry. I'm like, wow, I'm really useless. I can't make my ideas work. That was a stupid idea. Why did I even suggest that? And it's so disproportional. Even, when I'm dating and I don't get a text back, the world is ending. And I was like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
I should not.
I hate rejection as well.
Yeah.
Sorry to drop. Like it's just like, and I was talking to someone the other week about sales on this podcast about sales, and I wouldn't be able to do cold calling because that fear of rejection and getting rejected and beating yourself up way too hard is very, I don't know, very detrimental, and it can affect deep down quite a lot.
Everybody feels it, that's the thing. But when you have ADHD, that feeling is usually intensified, and that's what can be quite different for people that do have ADHD, because the rejection sucks in and of itself, but when that's maybe amplified times 10 and it's a big part of your job, that's where you can experience like a lot of stress and a lot of self-doubt. And I've had that a lot. And finding out that I have ADHD, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I try to distance myself from it. But also a lot of that, I make a lot of mistakes. Like sometimes like I lack the attention to detail. But now that I know that, and it's not me being unintelligent or lazy, like I said, I've got a virtual assistant, but I pay people to fact check and to check my work and my writing and things like that, to make sure that I don't make, well, if I make these mistakes, that they're rectified. But it was knowing that there's a reason for that, and it's not because I don't care, and it's not because I'm stupid. It's because I have ADHD, and that's just a part of the condition. So it allowed me to give myself a lot more grace, and that actually gave me a lot of confidence. And that's helped me a lot. But it's also made me understand that there are certain things that I can't do, and it's not worth the hassle or the struggle. Because some things do feel like an uphill battle, especially at running a business. Don't get me started on my taxes.
Right.
Scary.
So here's one thing that, because I don't know if you do the same when you have an eye roll when you need to do accounting and taxes and things like that. And the one thing that I found is to control my ADD situation is to have something to look forward to. So whenever day of tax and accounting registration came, like, because I used to do it like every single month when I had the business. Every single month I would sit down and put order to all of my, not tax submission, but accounting, right? In accounting software, just label every expense, everything up and so on. And what Nikki would say is, look, if you sit down and do this by midday, I'm going to go and get you some Krispy Kreme.
Oh,
so
she's so sweet.
And I'll be like, oh, it's almost 12. I need to finish it. Otherwise, I'm not getting Krispy Kreme. So that kind of like reward and setting expectations, saying I need to go through this very hard bit now because I have this to look up for. And afterwards, it helped some of my ADD situations.
No, that's really useful. That doesn't work for me. I don't have a strong enough incentive. Yeah, I don't have a strong enough incentive, but also, so this is my problem. Being a founder, having your own company, there's no one putting pressure on you. There's no one saying there's this deadline. And when I set my own deadline, what's going to happen if I miss it? I'm going to fire myself? No. So like that, I guess, stress isn't there for me. That's why I love studying, and I'm going to do my PhD, because you've got strict deadlines, and if you miss them, you fail. So that always really works. But when it comes to me and myself, I was supposed to do something today that I've just remembered that I forgot to do.
How do you handle that? Do you handle that in any way, or do you just structure your business that deadlines are not a thing?
I structure my business that deadlines aren't a thing. Or like now I have my virtual assistant, but Chanel, no, okay, fine. And it's a nice person to put pressure on me, because she'll be like, I need this by this date. But it's never normally like that much. So I'm quite lucky where I don't have strict deadlines for my work, which is really helpful. But where it comes to like the accounting and things like that, I don't know if the way that you've said it makes me feel like maybe I'm accounting wrong. There's like a little bit of panic there. But I just download, because I bank with Starling, I just download all of my accounts and send them straight to my accountant. But the good thing with the
I didn't have
app,
an accountant. That's why I'm like,
did you do it yourself?
I was doing accounting myself, and then sending it to I had a tax submission accountant that would do the tax submission. But every single month, all of my expenses, I would label them.
See, I just do mine once a year. So I download everything and send it to my accountant.
Yeah.
And I'm probably paying more tax than I should, because I put things on my personal credit card that I could expense, but that's too much for me. But I get the thing is, with my lack of attention to detail, or where I miss things, and with my ADHD, I get really bad anxiety around things. So like I checked our messages meticulously, because I'm like, have I got the wrong date? Have I got the wrong time? But then it got to the point where I was so stressed that I just stopped looking. I was like, I'm not going to look. And then I was just like, what if he said that I don't have to be here? What if he said this? And I stress, and then I look and I'm like, oh, I had no reason to stress.
You know,
and I have that relationship a lot.
I'm quite bad at organization stuff as well. I think that's my fault as well, because if I would be a good organizer, I would probably have sent you a proper schedule, and sent you pings and reminders like upfront and so on. But I was
we really just winged it.
when did I send you a message? Yesterday. I was like,
yeah,
you're good for tomorrow. That's not very good organization. Right. Want to rewind a bit to your podcast?
Yeah, podcast.
Because I had a couple of thoughts. I think you're gonna have a hard time, because you're right. We sensationalize bad behavior and these chaotic scenarios, and that's what media is, but that's our fault, the consumers, that we get a dopamine effect from that. I think if you are going to be able to make it interesting in that sense, and put a spotlight, like you said, on here's the bad, and here's what good looks like, or here's what, getting out of those kind of situations looks like. But I do think that in order to make something like that popular, you need to kind of like have a lot of hooks and a lot of I don't know, maybe social media posts and videos and trailers like I do. I don't know if you've seen any of my trailers to my podcast. I kind of spotlight snippets that make it seem like so controversial, that the person that's is about to say something so controversial, when in reality the conversations are quite leveled and people pour their souls and so on. But from the trailers, it just seems like is this crazy controversial piece of
I like it.
and bait and switch. Yeah, exactly. And I think you might need to do that to attract people, because people come for the, they come for the controversy, they stay for the conversation in a sense, right?
No, literally, because I do the exact same thing. But what's really good about this is I'm really looking to leverage my network. I've got a lot of cool people in my network, or people that are popular. And I think it's going to be really great to have those people have these conversations. and kind of demonstrate a level of care for the topic. And I think that's going to be quite helpful, because for a lot of these things, usually it's just women talking about them, but I really want to, you know, bring a lot of men onto the podcast to talk about how they can be allies, or their experiences, or what works, I suppose, for them. Because a lot of people forget that with a lot of these things, men experience this as well, but also they can be really instrumental in this change, because let's be honest, like, a lot of these things are gendered issues, and they are perpetrated by men. Not all men, but usually always a man. And what it is, again, Daniel, this comedian, said, like, it's not enough to be, you know, the 9 out of 10 men that aren't doing anything wrong, because if you're sitting there and witnessing that one doing something horrendous and you're not saying anything, you may as well not be there at all.
Yeah, true.
And that for me is quite interesting, because I've got my best friends and my brothers and my dad are obviously really great. I am biased, but they are wonderful men who always get involved and speak up for the rights of anyone that's marginalized, like not just women. And those are the people that make a really big difference. And it's, how can you be like that? How can you, as an individual, help something that's inherently negative and impacts your community, your sisters, your daughters, your wives, your mothers? And when you sit down and you talk to a lot of men about these things, they're really open to listening. They understand, and they do some really great things themselves, but it's just not spoken about enough. Men don't necessarily talk about it, and it makes sense. You know, you might be a great ally for women, but you're probably not going to sit there and talk about it, because it's not necessarily relevant to you in an everyday moment. It's relevant when you're in that situation. But for women, these are things that are relevant like all day, every day. I'm fearful when I'm out at night by myself, when I'm on the train, sometimes when I'm working with clients for the first time. And it's a lot. I have to think a lot about being a woman and how that impacts my safety, which that goes away like immediately when I'm with a man. You know, when I'm walking down the street with my partner, when I'm with my brothers, when I'm just with any of my guy friends, I don't worry. And it's funny, I say this to my partner a lot. I'm like, when I'm with you, I just want air in my head. Like, I don't want to have to worry about these things.
Yeah.
And it's great, because I feel safe. And that's what I really want to leverage from the people around me, the men around me, is how can you make sure that you have that impact? How can you be an ally and make other women feel safe? And that's what's really useful, because as a man, you have a lot of power and influence over your own network, over your friends. And you see it a lot. People won't say certain things around me in any kind of space, like in work, in social settings, because they're going to know my immediate reaction to things. I'm very liberal, and I'm liberal. And so they probably wouldn't say any of like the isms or bigotry around me. And it can be the same for men. I think when you're respectful of certain things, or you're visibly an ally, things aren't going to happen around you or in front of you. And even that in itself creates a level of safety. And it's being able to leverage that and being vocal about those things. So, you know, you have this podcast, for example. Let's say you're very vocal about women's rights. You're not going to have a guest come on here and spread misogynistic rhetoric.
Exactly. I've had people that, because I'm sorry for the parenthesis, I'm on something called matchmaker.fm. I said I'm going to go on this. It
sounds like a dating service.
Yeah, it sounds like a dating service. But what it is it matches podcasts with guests, with potential guests.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. And so far, I have one person, an amazing woman that's going to come on the podcast soon. She's from Kent, and she does a lot of great stuff with her business. But I also had a lot of men that applied, that have businesses. And a couple of them that I got into discussion with, I had to go and do research on them. And then they had podcasts themselves, and I started watching, and I've realized that they have quite misogynistic approach, and like the kind of like hard cap bro type of podcasts, and just flexing and manspreading and all of that stuff on their podcast, talking about certain topics. And I'm like, I don't want that kind of people. Like, again, Misfit Founders, I want this to be a podcast that resonates with all founders. And because if I just bring a certain type of founders, then it's not for everyone. But fundamentally, a lot of us feel misfit in being a founder and entrepreneur and going on this journey. And interestingly enough, the hard cap bro founder type, I think those are the ones that feel the least as a misfit. They feel like
there's a level of like entitlement
and ownership and that they belong and so on. So I call the whole point of this podcast is misfits. And if I don't have those kind of people as an audience, I'm perfectly fine. Anyways, they wouldn't see this as something that they can learn from. So
no, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, like, on the topic of like misfit founders, I do think, like we said on LinkedIn, I think we had this conversation, but starting a business is not what I thought it was going to be.
How come? What was your impression of it?
I thought it was going to be like this really great girl boss moment,
Instagram moment that we all see people,
because like I spent all of this money, and I was like, oh, I'm my own boss. This is fun. It's horrible. I get like, there's all the accountability falls on me. If something goes wrong, it's me. Even if it's not me, it's me. So that was really hard in and of itself. And with the undiagnosed ADHD, I just felt really useless. I wasn't sure if it was this hard for everyone. You see a lot of founders and you see a lot of people that have done really well and they look like they're doing really well and they won't tell you otherwise. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm just struggling. This is hard for me. Yeah.
It's not everyone else has it. It's just me. I'm the problem.
And the amount of times like I've wanted to quit and give up, and actually I'm in the process. So I used to have another branch of the business that I'm closing. And it was more of that talent management. And you know what? That wasn't for me, and I didn't enjoy it. I started it and I felt like an absolute failure, but my passion wasn't in it. I didn't enjoy it anymore. And I was just like, I'm not going to keep doing this for the sake of money, because it's not enjoyable. And actually the process of closing it down has brought me so much joy. I'm really excited. I'm going to have like a little party.
Close down party.
When it's done. And it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I created the agency when I started influencing, because there's a lot of isms in any industry. And it was the same with the kind of content creator industry, where marginalized creators weren't getting paid the same as your, skinny white types. And obviously that was really problematic. And so I started managing influencers and helping them get good rates and advocate for themselves. And it wasn't feasible because I don't like taking fees. I know that's how a business works. Otherwise, it's not profitable. But where I'm a content creator and I get paid for that, I don't need it. I don't need the money.
Right.
Obviously, you always need more money. Have that conversation where money doesn't stretch as far as you would like. But I didn't like how things were working, and I just thought, okay, this isn't where I want to be. Like, I love making things better for marginalized people in any industry, and that's where that kind of offering came from. And now I work directly with a client to make sure that there is that level of diversity, that they are supporting marginalized people across the board. That's internally, externally, with their clients, customers, and employees. So I've kind of stopped doing that talent side of thing. And I still do it in a sense, because I have like a 500 client list for the people that I work with. And I help other influencers learn how to do business development. I give them the client contacts so they can manage themselves. I connect with tools, work kits, anything that they may need to manage themselves and not have that dependency on agencies. And the good thing is I don't have to charge them for that. Like, it's an entirely free service for my friends and any other influencers that I come across in the industry, which is really fun. And that gives me a sense of fulfillment. But it's great because I'm getting paid from the client and I can put them in touch with these influencers. It's like, oh, you want diversity? Well, here are all the influencers that I know that can be really good for you. So it's kind of like an unpaid middleman, which I really like because I'm already getting paid by the client to work in this space. I'm getting paid for doing my own content creation. So it's nice to be able to like bridge the gap there, and I'm still making money elsewhere.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like you have revenue streams from both your influencer business as well as being a consultant and an advisor, like a equality advisor and inclusivity advisor for these companies. And it just feels right, isn't it? When you just are able to do stuff that is not money driven.
That's the goal. But I realize you have to be privileged to have that position. Like, I'm really grateful that I don't have to worry about money. And that kind of takes care of itself. And I think that gives me the opportunity to really ask like what my passion is, because I've started asking myself this question. It's like, if I won the lottery tomorrow, because there's someone in America that won like 2 billion on the lottery. Yeah. Wish it was me. Yeah. So it's like, if I won the lottery tomorrow, what would I do? And that's a question I ask myself because, I mean, God, I'm not that rich or that stable, but I just think, start from there. What would I do? I would work in the industry that I am. Like, I would still work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm like, great, I'm on the right track. But if I didn't ever have to work, what would I do? And it's like, I would consult part-time whilst traveling and having fun. And so I try to do that as much as possible. And I found the first business that I started that wasn't allowing me to do that.
Which was the
talent management. Because it wasn't adding up in the ways that I wanted it to. I didn't feel like I was leveraging my passion enough, which is the kind of like diversity and inclusion and just making strides for people that are marginalized. Obviously, I'm a woman, I'm mixed race, so there is a lot of like selfish desire in there.
But selfish good in a sense.
Yeah.
So, it's a good cause.
Yeah, it's a good level of selfishness, or at least my selfishness is rooted in interests that kind of help everyone. And so I'm closing that business that I'm really excited about, so I can focus on the other leg of it, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's what brings me a lot of happiness. And I find that a lot easier. It's not as taxing emotionally. It's not as kind of taxing.
Is it not? Because if like when you talk about and going into these companies and sorting out all of their
so this is the great thing.
Is it not
I don't do it that much.
Right.
So I take what I can handle, and I've just handed in my master's thesis, so now I've got a lot more free time. But I was seldom doing it amongst everything else, so it was a nice challenge every now and again. Whereas now I'm doing that a lot more often, but I won't take more than I can emotionally manage, which is really ironic actually, because the clients that need me the most are the clients I probably wouldn't work with, because they're the hardest to make change and they're the least interested in making change, which is really difficult for me because I want to go in there and make change. If you tell me there's a problem, I'm there to fix it. And if I don't fix it, or you don't implement my design or my recommendations, that's difficult for me because I don't feel like I've had the most impact. So like, I tend to work with clients that are willing to make change, which is funny because I do get offers from clients that aren't willing to make change, but you can assess that in the initial consultation when you're being hired for a tick box and not to kind of have an overall impact.
How do you figure out that? How do you figure out whether a company is there just to tick the box? Or
it's a lot of the time it's the level of interest and who is on board in that initial consultation and where that has come from. And a lot of it, sometimes it comes from the side of desk activities where you might just get booked for a couple of workshops and you're not going to make a lot of change in 2 workshops. Or in the initial consultation, like, oh, well, we don't have a lot of budget for this, or we're a big company, so we can give you exposure. And it's like, right, so you want me to give you my services as a mixed race woman for free when you bring in billions every year. And I'm like, do you see why that wouldn't be appropriate? And they're just like, no. It's like, okay, well, no, probably not going to do that.
Yeah, I don't think they realize that it just comes across as you don't care that much.
Yeah.
Because you're not willing to invest as much. It's like, oh, we'll give you exposure. No, we're not going to put dollar signs behind it.
Yeah. And that's where you kind of find you get to assess like that level of interest when it's just, this would be nice if you can do it for free. And that's where you're like, okay, well, this probably isn't gonna, and it's a lot of work, and it involves a lot. I don't just walk into an organization and say, oh, well, get some plants, get a water feature. That's going to make the office a nicer place. Maybe get a breastfeeding room. There are a lot of quick wins that anyone can find on Google. So it's not me walking into an organization and just saying that. It's sitting down, doing interviews, like doing my little observations, which is always fun. Seeing how the business operates, like speaking to people, understand where their frustrations are, where that's coming from.
Yeah.
I kind of working with the organization to get like a bespoke package of what is going to be feasibly useful. Like, what can we do? Because unfortunately, in every organization, you can't fix everything, but you can take steps to making sure that you're on the right track. And it's not always an easy process. You don't walk in and say, hire these people and everything's going to go away, especially in markets where it's very candidate-led. You have to hire the best candidate for the position. And the problem with a lot of these organizations is if you're not inclusive, the diversity isn't going to come. You can't just say we're going to hire for these things and then hope that they're going to join the organization, because you genuinely need to be an inclusive organization before diverse hires are going to be interested in working with you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you will spend all this money on hiring them and you won't be able to retain the talent. And rehiring talent is very expensive. So you have to make sure the organization's right before you can work on attracting that talent. I wouldn't go and work in a racist organization. It wouldn't make any sense. And so it's like you really have to work on that and increasing your employer branding and having an organization that can allow for diversity. And that's what people forget. It's not the simple case of saying, well, we're going to hire more women. Like, how do you treat them?
Have the space.
Yeah. And that's what people don't often realize. And there are a lot of organizations that are like, oh, well, we're hiring them, but they're just not staying. And it's like, yeah, it's rife with misogyny.
Like crap.
And it is really interesting. Yeah. And I've got, so many horror stories of organizations that I've been in over the years that are just all of the isms. And they're like, oh, we just don't know where we're going wrong. And that's why it's really difficult when you work in-house, because it can be really hard to say, it's you, it's director level. I mean, that's a lot. So as a consultant, it's great because you've paid me for the project. So I can afford to be honest and tell you it's this, and this. But I think when you're in-house, there is that risk that if you blow the whistle, it's what's that going to do for your longevity? And the results of the study that I've just done, this is bad because I've literally just finished, but 80%, 80 point something, I believe, of women chose to forego reporting of their sexual harassment in fear of repercussions to their jobs or their careers. That's a very high percentage.
That's very sad.
I finished it. I've submitted, so I'll send it to you. It's really sad. And like the impact of workplace sexual harassment, like a lot of respondents had suicide attempts. One which stuck with me is that she changed her entire career path, and she's in her 40s now. And she said that's one of her biggest life regrets, because she was a pharmacist in her early stages of pharmacy. She was being sexually harassed every day by her boss, quit altogether, chose a different career path, and said that it's the biggest regret of her life. And I think at 40 years old, it's quite something to say. So it's there, it happens, it's a very pervasive issue. And I'm trying when I'm going into these companies to kind of make that change. And it's not saying, oh, well, you're misogynistic or you're bad or this is awful. It's how are we inclusive and what does that look like? Because sometimes we just don't think. Sometimes it's outside of our scope of relevancy. And, it just happens. Some industries are very male dominated. And that's just the norm in those industries. And how are we then making sure that even in male dominated spaces that women are heard and they can comfortably exist in this space, and what that looks like and how we can achieve that? Just sometimes we forget.
Well, the other thing is, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions towards the end now. I do know that we've not touched on a lot of things, but I feel that we can talk for ages, and we'll definitely have you for part 2. Talk a bit more about your journey as a founder. But I think these are important topics to talk about. The other thing that's really sad to me is, apart from the very significantly bad thing, which is the fact that there is a lot of sexual harassment that happens and it's not reported because of the fear of repercussions. There's also the other sad bit is that there are people that want change in their organization, but they're not listened to, or they don't truly vocalize what they see as change needed because of the fear of repercussions as well. Like you talked about, a lot of the times is leadership that's at fault for, for having a, toxic environment. And being an employee in an organization like that, it's very hard to point the finger at the people that pay you and say, you're the problem. And that's why probably you're also producing a lot more change, because you're coming from the outside and saying, no, you're the problem and I don't care because I'm not your employee.
Well, that's the power in being external. But those situations are really difficult. And interestingly, I mean, those organizations don't last because women are invaluable. Like in their own right as employees, as just a part of society. You cannot run a business. You cannot exist as a business if you have behaviors that are harmful to women. Women exist in society. It is what it is. And to be disrespectful or to abuse or harass them, it's not sustainable. So again, like the Russell Brand situation, he's done that across his career, allegedly. And it's been a long time, but it's now coming out, and it will hopefully, probably, if the allegations are true, be the end of his career. And so whether it's a business, whether it's a person, it doesn't have shelf life. In some cases it does, but for an organization, it's very hard to keep under wraps. So they usually fail, or they're usually bought out, or certain things happen, that person is removed. And so even if it is someone who is a founder or in senior leadership, it's in the company, it's in societies, it's in the individuals, it's in everybody's best interest to remove that person and create a diverse workforce. Because in business, we do see it a lot of times where they are quite toxic work environments, but it's not sustainable. Your good talent will leave. People won't want to do repeat business with you. Yeah. And it just doesn't make good business sense to be that way inclined. It might work for a while, it might work for a time, but overall it is detrimental to the business. And I think most organizations do recognize that. Obviously, if it's a small company or if it is the founder that does that, then you're kind of screwed. But when an organization can identify that this is a problem, to be fair, that's usually when I get called in, a lot of them are receptive to hearing what I have to say. And I think, again, being external, I don't have that fear of being fired or being scared to report my findings. Mm-hmm. That has happened to me in the past when I have worked internally, because it is hard. You have a rapport with everyone at the organization. Sometimes you might even be friends with the person that's causing this damage, and it's how do you navigate that difficult conversation? And I found as a consultant, it's a lot easier. And I don't think I would go internally again for that reason, unless I've vetted the organization and it's quite an inclusive and an open and honest environment where you can have those conversations. But normally when I'm called into situations like that, there has been issues with reporting or hierarchies that prevent it. But I think being aware of these things happening and knowing that any organization is going to have people problems. Like no matter what the industry is, no matter what the organization is, people come with problems. It is what it is. You know, you love your parents, you love your siblings, you love your partner, but you still have conflict. It's a normal part of life. And it's how you deal with that conflict and how you navigate it that can make the difference between a really great organization and one that's almost doomed to fail. And it comes to the same thing, like any of the isms, like any bigotry, any of these things, it really is all stemming from poor communication or poor company values or cultures. Because if you're working in an organization that really values people, you don't have these problems.
Yeah, very true. If you're working in a company where people have a fear towards, vocalizing things that are happening, that's just going to emphasize some of the happenings that are happening, right? Well, this was this is a really good conversation. I think I've learned a lot. I think I've been more quiet than a lot of other podcast guests that I had, mainly because I'm in a position where I'm a sponge more than anything.
Yeah.
If you need guests for your podcast, more than happy to. From a victim perspective, in a sense, since it's the first time I publicly say this, but I've been in an abusive relationship where I was kind of like abused by my partner. Men go through this as well, and I think that's why I'm a lot more receptive by nature to
Well, there's
inequalities
a
and
huge
things like
stigma
that.
about it, and that's what I find really upsetting, that a lot of men aren't willing to have this conversation because like it works both ways. Like I know I'm obviously really sorry that you experienced that.
You're
because
also
it's not nice, and there is a stigma about reporting even for men because it's, well, you're bigger, you're stronger, deal with it. And actually, interestingly enough, like a lot of abuse towards men does end up being quite severe because men don't have that sense of community that women do, where you're allowed to be vulnerable and express things that you're going through. And a lot of the time when men do report, it's suck it up. You look at social media, and when men are vulnerable, a lot of the time they're bullied for it.
Yeah.
And it's all part and parcel, like the same thing. A lot of it is gender stereotypes, inequalities and discrimination that say, as a man, you must be this. And that also protects women a lot of the time, because if there's that gender norm that women are weak and they're subservient and they're all of these things, when you're now saying that that's not how it is and actually she's really abusive, people just look at you as if you're making it up.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not. It's just, I think there are a lot of issues like in this conversation that aren't tackled by society, and I think they remain a taboo, and that gives abusers and perpetrators like a lot of freedom to exist as they are, like going like unrecognized and unpunished.
I don't want to make this conversation and flip it towards, but fundamentally
No, but it's still impacting. I would encourage you to talk about it a lot more, because there just aren't a lot of men that are talking about it and being open about what that is. I mean, thankfully there are a lot of women that are open and honest about it and share that, and I think that's really useful. Like I know a lot of the industry that I work in, I know a lot of men that go through the same thing, and they don't have outlets, or there aren't people publicly talking about it. So it is always really useful, and I do think it is even really helpful that you've said that, and there are people that can watch that and be like, oh, that's happened to me, and I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of power in not being alone in things.
Yeah. Because
like the podcast, I mean, we spoke about before, just saying how much I struggle, and watching these episodes with other guests and seeing that they struggled too. It's going to make me sound negative, but I kind of sat there like, yes, like it's not just me, because there's something kind of really lonely about feeling like it's only impacting you, or starting this business and being like, oh, I'm the only one that struggled. You get imposter syndrome and all of these really horrible things. So watching the podcast and seeing other people struggle with starting a business and how hard it is and not realizing how much it takes, that's been really instrumental for me in not feeling like a failure and not feeling like I'm alone in struggling.
That's really great to hear.
Misery loves company.
That's really great to hear, because fundamentally that's what is supposed to be more,
No, it's helped me
emotional
a lot.
treatment in a sense, because we don't have all the answers in the world. There's no such thing as the perfect human being and the perfect founder. And I think we relate the most with challenges, with suffering in a sense. And if we can convey more of that, then I think we're all going to be in a better place, because it's an emotional cure in a sense. If you feel like you can relate and you feel like others share your suffering, it takes some of the load off you, right? It's the more you hear about it, the more you feel like there's other people that are taking your burden as well, and all of a sudden it just becomes a support net. And that's that's what I want to do with this. That's the whole point, right?
It's definitely working. Helped me.
Awesome. And you're here now, which is awesome. Right. I usually end the conversation with 3 questions, which is kind of like I don't know if I've mentioned this, you might not be prepared for this. So 3 questions, really kind of like flash answers on this. 1, what is a quote that you live by?
Oh, great. This is one from my brother, actually. God, it'd be awkward if I get it wrong. It's, the ladder of success is of infinite length, so aim not to reach its end, but to distance yourself from its beginning. And that helps me a lot, because I'm never satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think I don't reward myself enough, and I'm very separated from my achievements. And I'll have one, and now I'm like, great, I don't have my PhD yet. I need to go and get my PhD. And that can be really hard. I'm like, wow, I'm so far from all of the things that I want to do. But then I always think, and I stop, and I'm like, well, look where I started.
Yeah.
I've got 2 master's degrees. Like, I've got my own business. I'm successful in all these different areas. They might not be necessarily where I want to end up, but I've actually come really far. And I think that helps me quite a lot when I'm feeling down about how much further I've got to go, or I don't feel like I've accomplished as much as I would have wanted to. I look at where I started, and then I'm like, wow, I'm really far from there.
That's extremely valid, and I feel like more people need to embrace that motto, because we all kind of like just
what's next?
Yeah,
what's
and
next,
try to reach that goal that's always in yeah. Second one that I wanted to ask, book that changed your life or impact your life, either personal or professional.
I'm just going to go for it. Kathy Glass, she writes a lot of books about her experiences as a foster carer.
Okay.
And they're not entirely, I suppose, relevant to what I do, but I've read them since I was a teenager. And it's hearing stories of children and adults and their experiences and how that shapes who they are. So, okay, for example, there's one book where a girl was abused by her father, and wider family network, and she's grown up in foster care, and she's done a really good job of navigating that, and she's gone on to lead like a perfectly normal, relatively happy life. And I think I must have read like 20 of her books by now. And it's just helped me realize that actually there are a lot of people in life that are struggling with a lot of different things. And A, they can be overcome, but B, just give people some bloody grace in life.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, and it's weird because they're just about foster caring, but reading all of these different stories about how common these things are, and again, that's informed with my research, it's like people are really dealing with a lot, and I can get frustrated really easily.
Yeah.
And it's made me take a step back and just be like, people are going through a lot, people have experienced a lot. Just, this is why I say, like, I just like to try and be positive and have a good impact, because we've all suffered in some way, shape or form. And the books aren't really relevant to life, I suppose, but they teach some really valuable lessons.
It seems like it. It seems like it. So that's perfectly fine answer. Okay. Don't try to overthink it. And the last question, what is a good habit that you advocate for?
Oh, great. This one's from Reddit.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read it. It's a non-zero day.
Non-zero day?
Non-zero day.
No, I haven't heard of that.
So there's this post. I'm going to try and send it to you so you can link it, because it really changed my life. It's just about having a no-zero day, which is you do something every day to support your future goals. And they said this really interesting bit in it. It's like, cool, it's 11:58. You've not done anything positive for that day. You're reading a book that you need for class, read one sentence. You're trying to get fit, do one push-up.
Okay.
And he was like, make sure every day, even if it's one thing, that you're doing something for yourself and your future. And that's why he calls it like a non-zero day. And he was like, you know what? Once you've got into the habit of a non-zero day, you'll find out how successful you can be, because you might decide, okay, non-zero day, I'm going to do one push-up. That one push-up turns into 10. That 10 turns into 100. And from that one push-up, you've done 100 push-ups. I don't know if that's feasible. I don't do push-ups. But
it's definitely feasible. Yeah.
probably not for me. And then it's, that sentence turns into a paragraph. That paragraph turns into a page and then a chapter.
Yeah.
And it's creating that healthy habit where even if it's just a little bit, every day you're working towards your goals. So you can go to bed at night and say, cool, like I've at least done something. And for me, that's been really instrumental with my ADHD and that rejection and not feeling like a failure. So now once a week, I'm like, what did I do every day? And I can look back and I'm like, okay, that week I did these things. And it helps when I feel down about myself, especially as maybe I haven't done good business development that week. I'm like, okay, but what else have I done that week? Oh, okay, well, I did 20,000 steps every day. I don't know, like I read my book. I finished my dissertation, because sometimes I might not be meeting the goal I have in mind, but I've done some really great things as well. So that helps me, again, like stay on top of things when I'm feeling a bit down.
That is it is really good habit to take on. I do feel like I need that habit, because I have days, I have 0 days, right, where I don't do anything towards my future, and it feels really crappy. I don't know. I don't feel good. I feel I think I have this
but that's
FOMO.
That's also
feeling.
Okay, because it might not necessarily, okay, fine, you're not working towards your future, but on those days, are you working towards being in a better space? I think people think self-care is going to the gym or going to the spa, but there are some days where I do absolutely nothing, but I still count that as a non-zero day, because that might be my day to decompress and work through my feelings. And if I worked through my feelings, like that's a good day for me. Sometimes I'll just spend the day crying. It is what it is.
It is.
I'm a big advocate of feeling your emotions.
100%, yeah.
But you also have to listen to your body, because sleeping or spending a day doing absolutely nothing might be recovery for you. And there's nothing wrong in that.
It doesn't feel good. If I have this itch, I always like, oh man, I spend the day. I feel, you know how it feels to me? It feels like very similar to when in your youth, when you'd go ballistic one evening, dead drunk, go out of your way, and then the next day you feel super guilty.
Yep.
That's how it feels to me if I have a day where I don't do something for my future. I don't know. It's just, it feels like I feel guilty.
Well, then just try and get used to the idea that it's okay to take a day purely for yourself. But if having fun for you feels like doing something towards your future, then that's also okay. But just make sure it's like, okay, cool, 5 minutes before bed, I'm going to make a plan, or I'm going to add to this. But get comfortable with doing nothing. Not enough adults do that. We're not productivity machines.
Yeah.
Maybe I do nothing too much.
To change that. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. I know you have somewhere to be, so we'll close it off here. I feel that we'll need to do something about either part 2 or an Ask Me Anything
we can do either.
If you want to do that.
I like Brighton. I will be coming back.
Definitely, because I know there will be people in